What if I told you some of the most beloved cult movies of all time were once laughed out of theaters, buried by studios, and written off as career killers? These films didn't just flop, they bled money. And yet, decades later, fans defend them harder than Oscar winners. How did that happen? Number 12, Heaven's Gate, 1980. This wasn't just a flop. This was the movie that scared Hollywood straight. Heaven's Gate didn't quietly fail at the box office. It collapsed so loudly that studios rewrote their entire rule book out of fear. Michael Cimino walked into this project as the most trusted director in America after The Deer Hunter. He walked out as the cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms for decades. The production spiraled fast, endless takes, sets rebuilt from scratch, shooting schedules stretched into madness. Budgets exploded. By the time the film reached theaters, executives were already panicking. The initial cut was brutally long. Critics tore into it immediately, and audiences stayed away in droves. The financial loss was catastrophic. United Artists was nearly destroyed by a single film. But here's the part history forgot. Under the wreckage was an uncompromising vision of America tearing itself apart. Heaven's Gate wasn't interested in tidy heroes or comforting myths. It portrayed power as ugly, violence as chaotic, and progress as deeply unfair. That honesty felt like an attack in 1980. Decades later, restored versions revealed staggering craftsmanship. The cinematography became legendary. Directors who once mocked it began quietly defending it. Film historians reframed it not as arrogance, but as obsession. What was once called self-indulgent is now recognized as fearless. Heaven's Gate didn't suddenly improve, viewers did. Time gave it the audience it always needed. Number 11. The Adventures of Buckaroo, Banzai. Across the Eighth Dimension, 1984. This movie didn't confuse audiences by accident. It challenged them on purpose. Buckaroo Banzai arrived in theaters like a message from another universe, and nobody knew how to read it. Studios couldn't explain it. Trailers failed. Viewers walked out scratching their heads. The box office response was cold and unforgiving. Buckaroo Banzai refuses to introduce itself politely. It drops you into a world already in motion. Characters act like legends before you understand why. The plot assumes you are smart enough to catch up. That arrogance terrified mainstream audiences in the mid-80s. Critics were split down the middle. Some dismissed it as chaos. Others sensed something radical underneath the jokes and science fiction madness. Peter Weller's performance became quietly iconic. He wasn't a loud hero, he was confident, curious, and utterly unbothered by the absurdity around him. Years later, fans built the mythology the studio never could. Dialogue became sacred. Side characters became cult icons. Midnight screenings turned confusion into celebration. Buckaroo Banzai wasn't failing to explain itself. It was daring you to keep up. Hollywood spent decades chasing its tone and never quite succeeded. This wasn't a box office disaster because it was bad. It failed because it treated its audience like collaborators instead of customers. Number 10. Blade Runner, 1982. Blade Runner is proof that being ahead of your time can be fatal at the box office. When it opened, audiences expected a futuristic thrill ride. What they got was a rain-soaked meditation on memory, identity, and decay. Many viewers didn't know what to make of it. Ticket sales reflected that confusion. Early reviews were conflicted. Some praised the visuals. Others complained about the pacing and tone. The studio panicked and forced changes that muddied the original vision. Financially, the film underperformed. It was not the smash hit everyone assumed it would be. Then, something strange happened. Blade Runner refused to disappear. Home video releases exposed new generations to its hypnotic world. Alternate cuts peeled away studio interference. Directors openly admitted stealing from it. Entire genres were born in its shadow. What once felt slow began to feel deliberate. What once felt cold began to feel prophetic. The film's questions about humanity only grew sharper with time. Blade Runner didn't age. The world caught up. Today, it is studied, imitated, and endlessly debated. One of cinema's greatest legacies began life as a financial disappointment. That irony is the point. Number 9. The Thing, 1982. This movie didn't just stumble at the box office, it was actively rejected. When the thing premiered, audiences weren't just unimpressed, they were uncomfortable. Critics accused it of being cold, cynical, and excessive. Some reviews read like warnings. The timing was disastrous. Friendly alien stories dominated the culture, and Carpenter showed up with a film that said, "Trust is a lie and survival turns people against each other." Financially, it collapsed. The studio had expected a hit. Instead, theaters emptied fast. Carpenter, once seen as a rising genre voice, suddenly looked radioactive. Hollywood quietly moved on. But the failure had nothing to do with quality. The thing was operating on a different frequency. It stripped away heroism and replaced it with suspicion. Nobody was safe. Nobody was pure. The creature wasn't just a monster. It was paranoia itself. That idea was too sharp for audiences who still wanted reassurance. Over time, the conversation flipped. Filmmakers began calling it perfect. The practical effects became legendary, not for shock value, but for craftsmanship. The pacing, once criticized, was re-examined as surgical. Fans realized the ending wasn't cruel. It was honest. Today, The Thing sits near the top of horror and science fiction rankings. It didn't fail because it went too far. It failed because it told the truth too early. Number 8. Scarface, 1983. It's hard to believe now, but Scarface was considered a mess on arrival. Critics slammed it. Some called it tasteless. Others accused it of glorifying the worst instincts imaginable. The violence shocked reviewers. The performances were mocked. Box office returns were strong, but nowhere near what the studio expected given the hype. What scared people most wasn't the crime. It was the mirror. Scarface refused to pretend ambition was noble. Tony Montana wasn't charming. He was reckless, loud, and destructive. Audiences weren't used to a rise and fall story that offered zero moral cushioning. The backlash was immediate. Reviews were brutal. Awards ignored it. Hollywood treated it as an embarrassment. Then something strange happened. Audiences didn't let it go. Quotes escaped into culture. Scenes became mythic. Young filmmakers rewatched it obsessively. What critics saw as excess, fans saw as honesty. The film captured greed without pretending it was glamorous. The excess was the warning. Over decades, Scarface transformed into a cultural artifact, not because it was misunderstood, but because it was too clear. It showed exactly where unchecked hunger leads. The cult following didn't invent meaning. It recognized it. Scarface didn't change, the audience did. Number 7. Brazil, 1985. Brazil didn't just fail at the box office, it fought its own studio on the way down. Terry Gilliam delivered a nightmare satire wrapped in dark humor and suffocating bureaucracy. Executives panicked. They wanted something lighter, something marketable. Gilliam refused. The studio cut the film. Gilliam fought back publicly. Ads ran in newspapers calling out executives by name. The conflict became legend. Meanwhile, audiences barely showed up. The film felt too strange, too bleak, too defiant. Critics were divided. Some praised its imagination. Others dismissed it as chaotic. Financially, it struggled. But Brazil wasn't designed to comfort anyone. It was a scream against systems that erase people quietly. Years later, the studio interference became part of the myth. Viewers sought out Gilliam's intended version. The satire aged disturbingly well. Bureaucracy, surveillance, meaningless procedure. None of it felt exaggerated anymore. Brazil became a cult classic because it refused compromise. It didn't lose money by accident. It lost money because it refused to lie. Number 6. Big Trouble in Little China, 1986. This movie collapsed at the box office for one simple reason. Nobody knew what they were watching. Big Trouble in Little China was sold like a straightforward action blockbuster. But what audiences got was something far stranger and far smarter. John Carpenter built a fantasy comedy that deliberately flipped the hero myth upside down, and mainstream viewers were not ready. Kurt Russell's Jack Burton looks like a classic action lead. Loud, confident, always talking, but the joke is that he's completely out of his depth. He isn't the chosen one. He isn't the smartest guy in the room. He barely understands what's happening. The real hero operates quietly in the background while Burton blunders forward, convinced he's in control. Critics didn't know how to process that inversion. Some called it sloppy. Others accused it of tonal confusion. Audiences expecting muscle-bound triumph felt tricked. Ticket sales reflected the disconnect. The studio quickly labeled it a disappointment. Then, time worked its magic. Fans realized the humor wasn't accidental. The chaos was deliberate. The film was parodying action cinema while celebrating it at the same time. Every rewatch revealed sharper jokes, tighter construction, and deeper affection for pulp mythology. Today, Big Trouble in Little China is quoted endlessly. Its confidence became legendary. What once seemed messy is now praised as fearless. It didn't fail because it lacked clarity. It failed because it trusted the audience to catch up. Number 5. The Last Starfighter, 1984. The Last Starfighter arrived with a bold idea and paid the price for arriving too early. The film centered on a teenage nobody recruited into an interstellar war through a video game. Today, that premise sounds prophetic. In the mid-80s, it sounded risky and strange. The studio poured money into groundbreaking visual effects. Early computer-generated imagery replaced traditional models. The technology was ambitious, but audiences weren't convinced. Critics fixated on the visuals instead of the heart of the story. Box office numbers disappointed. The film quietly slipped out of conversation. What critics overlooked was the sincerity. The Last Starfighter wasn't cynical. It believed in escape, possibility, and ordinary people becoming extraordinary. It treated imagination as a doorway, not a joke. That earnestness didn't align with trends chasing edge and irony. Years later, fans rediscovered it on home video. The effects became charming rather than distracting. The themes aged beautifully. Creators raised on games and digital worlds saw themselves reflected clearly for the first time. The cult following grew because the film spoke directly to dreamers who felt invisible. It didn't bomb because it lacked vision. It bombed because it predicted a future before audiences were ready to live in it. Number 4. Labyrinth, 1986. Labyrinth is the rare failure that grew stronger with every generation. On release, it underperformed badly. Audiences didn't know who it was for. Too strange for kids, too whimsical for adults. The box office reflected that confusion. Jim Henson created a dream logic fantasy filled with creatures, riddles, and emotional symbolism. The story wasn't about defeating evil. It was about growing up, letting go, and navigating power dynamics. That subtlety was lost on opening weekend crowds. Critics were lukewarm. Some praised the imagination. Others dismissed it as unfocused. Studios expected a straightforward fantasy hit and got something far more personal. Then the slow burn began. Kids who grew up with it never forgot it. The music embedded itself into memory. The visuals felt timeless. The themes matured as the audience matured. What once seemed odd became meaningful. Labyrinth didn't become a cult classic because of nostalgia alone. It survived because it respected its viewers. It trusted them to grow into it. That patience is why it endures. Number 2. The King of Comedy, 1982. This film made people deeply uncomfortable, and that discomfort killed it at the box office. Coming off major success, Martin Scorsese delivered something quiet, awkward, and unsettling. Audiences expected charisma and confidence. What they got was obsession and desperation. The story follows a man who believes fame is owed to him, not earned, owed. The performance is intentionally hollow. The humor lands painfully. Viewers didn't know whether to laugh or recoil. Critics were divided. Ticket sales were weak. At the time, it felt cruel. Today, it feels terrifyingly accurate. The film predicted a culture obsessed with attention, validation, and visibility at any cost. It showed how fantasy and entitlement blur into danger. What once seemed exaggerated now feels restrained. Over the years, filmmakers revisited it with new eyes. Audiences reinterpreted its tone. The awkwardness became the point. The silence became the threat. The King of Comedy didn't fail because it lacked energy. It failed because it held a mirror people weren't ready to face. Its cult status comes from recognition, not revision. It didn't age into relevance. Society walked straight into it. Number 1. Xanadu, 1980. This was supposed to be a guaranteed hit, a glossy fantasy, a popular star, a massive soundtrack. Instead, Xanadu became a punchline overnight. Critics tore it apart. Audiences stayed away. The box office numbers were humiliating. The problem wasn't effort, it was tone. Xanadu didn't commit to nostalgia or modernity. It existed between eras, unapologetically strange. The story barely mattered. The visuals were excessive. Reviewers called it empty spectacle. But something strange happened after failure. People stopped expecting logic and started enjoying the dream. The music survived. The style aged into charm. Fans embraced its artificiality instead of resisting it. What was once mocked became adored. Xanadu didn't become a cult classic because it improved. It became one because it stopped pretending to be respectable. It leaned into fantasy completely. That confidence arrived too late for its box office moment, but perfectly for future audiences. Sometimes failure isn't about being wrong. It's about refusing to apologize. Now it's your turn. Which of these disasters deserves redemption, and which one still doesn't work for you at all? Was Hollywood wrong, or did audiences grow softer with time? Drop your most controversial take in the comments and defend it.